Welcome to the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I am here live from Chicago, Illinois. We are a day ahead of Ohio State taking on Northwestern, and it's going to be a game more like most of the games for Ohio State this weekend. We imagine this is not going to be one of the games like last week where Ohio State was in a dogfight. We don't expect anyway. If anything of that sort happens, then the Buckeyes haven't handled their business. So we're going to talk some Northwestern here in a little bit. But first, I wanted to hit on some other things, some national stuff, college football playoff rankings. And if you've been with us before, you obviously know how this works by now. Feel free to grab a drink and kick off the weekend. I just got to Chicago before this game, so I have water. So the first time this year, I'm not enjoying a beer with you guys, but that'll be all right. To talk some of the national scene, we've brought in Bill Bender this week from the Sporting News. Bill, thanks for jumping on with us. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well, Patrick. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, good to see you. I haven't seen you enough this year. You haven't been around as much. It's been a sad press box without you there.
Well, I'll be there for there's this game at the end of the year on November 26th that we're trying not to look forward to too much that I'm sure I'll be around for that one. How's Evanston? Is it are you getting rained on? I heard what's the weather like? I keep reading about that.
Yeah, we got here. We're actually in Chicago, but we're going to drive up tomorrow. But it is raining, not hard, but it is definitely raining. We flew in, and you come down out of the clouds, and it's just immediately wet on the plane. So, yeah, I mean, on the natural grass at Ryan Field, I imagine it's going to be one of those where those old school games, we get the uniforms dirty and everything. I think, old school type of game that should be fun. Let me ask you as we move on to kind of talking national scene here. What were your initial takes on this college football playoff ranking? How much do you take away from that first playoff ranking? And just your general thoughts on what we learned on Tuesday night.
I mean, I guess doing this for 9 years, I don't react as much anymore. I mean, Ohio State at 3 doesn't really matter because they're going to be 2 in a week as long as they take care of business tomorrow. They'll be 2 next week. And I've kind of contended that Georgia and Ohio State are the 2 best teams in the country all year. Now Tennessee's throwing a wrench in that with that offense. So the top 3 is fine. Clemson over Michigan, that's fine too because I think they penalized Michigan a little bit for an atrocious non-league schedule, which isn't all. But on the other hand, Michigan, everything they need is in front of them. They play Illinois, they play Ohio State. It's not like the Big Ten champion's going to get in. And LSU at 10, bit of a surprise. So I think those are the things like that allow for the SEC bias narrative to kick off. But in reality, to me, it's not really that big of a deal. I think those 5 teams in the top 11 from the SEC are probably about where they should be, with the exception of LSU.
What I was going to ask you about, I had that marked down, that LSU ranking, because I think that's the one that a lot of people looked at and were like, whoa, they obviously have the loss to Tennessee. They have the loss at the beginning of the year to Florida State, a Florida State team that's been okay this year. But you pay attention to the national scene probably more than a lot of our viewers. What do you make of LSU? Where would you have stuck them in the rankings if Bill Bender's rankings?
So if you sort them by the 2 loss teams, I actually think the AP top 25, for as much flack as voters get and people like to say polls don't matter, I always think it's pretty close. And maybe it's because I'm a sports writer and mine's always the top 25 that I put out there is typically pretty close. I would stack Utah, LSU, Penn State as those 2 lost teams. Like, how are you going to stack them up? I'd probably put Utah ahead of LSU, but then people would fire back. Well, LSU beat Florida pretty bad, and Florida beat Utah, and that's fair. So, as far as 1-loss teams that maybe got a little disrespected at the cost of the SEC, I'd say TCU's 1. And I like North Carolina right now. I think they're a dangerous team in the ACC with that offense around Drake May, who has numbers that are close. I'm not saying he's better, but his numbers are on par with Hendon Hooker and CJ Stroud. I mean, that's just from the number standpoint. He's really good.
From a purely Ohio State perspective, you mentioned it. Whether you're 1, 2, 3, 4, it doesn't matter. You're in the playoff, and that's the goal, right? So But I do think that there is an advantage. And I was looking at this week. I think the only time the number one seed hasn't made the national championship was 2014 when Ohio State beat Alabama. So there does seem to be an inherent advantage to beating that or playing that fourth seeded team who is generally the weakest of the field. And sometimes it's by quite a bit. How much stock do you put into getting to that number one seed? And do you think if Ohio State handles its business, they are there, or is there some work that still needs to be done because of the likes of Georgia and Tennessee?
I think the one seed, and this is also a geography type thing, is
Mhm.
I don't want to be in Atlanta if I'm an Ohio State team because you're gonna. I does it matter? Matter? Not really, but I mean, yeah. If you're down in Atlanta and have to play at Georgia or Tennessee, it's probably going to be 60-40 the other way.
Yeah.
And does the crowd matter? No, but I think for Georgia and Tennessee it does to get to Atlanta instead of playing in the other semifinal. It would matter for Alabama if they were able to slip into the playoff. It would matter for Clemson to play in Atlanta. So, but for Ohio State's standpoint, I don't think it. You know, they're going to have to go down there one way or the other and play a talented SEC team probably. Or if they get the one seed, I guess that's that if you were shaping out the playoff right now, you'd be like, okay, Alabama, then a Tennessee Georgia rematch, or Ohio State, then a Tennessee Georgia rematch, and Ohio State plays Clemson. And I think Ohio State's definitively better than Clemson right now. That could change, I suppose, but if they play Clemson head to head, I think it could resemble like the last time they played in the college football playoff. It wouldn't be pretty for Clemson.
Well, and I wonder too, given that that they're likely to play a Southern team, if they would choose to go out to Phoenix if they're the one seed. You know that has worked out well more times than not. Buckeye fans,
Oh yeah,
whether they travel out there, whether they live out there, they tend to show up out west, right? So I wonder if Ohio State would just, look,
they
we'll travel.
they. I was somebody asked me about that this week, and I have to look it up. Like, when's the last time have they ever done a bowl game in Atlanta?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know, I'm a Lancaster guy, and Atlanta's not a big fan of Lancaster because it's where William Sherman was born. So I'm pulling that history lesson out for people. But they haven't it. But like you said, the Fiesta Bowl track record of success is very, very well documented. All the way back to the Miami game, the Kansas State
Right.
game. They played there a lot. I think a lot of Ohio State grads retire out that way too. So it would be if they got a one seed and you pull Georgia out there or any of those Southern schools, it would be a distinct home field advantage for Ohio State, in my opinion.
Yeah, Steve Hellwagon is my roommate for this very trip. He is still getting the rental car. I took an Uber over here, but if he were here, I'm sure he would know off the top of his head if they'd played a bowl game in Atlanta. I can't recall one, but he tends to know that stuff better than
Has
I do.
Ohio State ever been to the Peach Bowl? I mean, I guess that's the
Yeah,
question.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but regardless, I think the main message, and I wrote about this week, was if you're Ohio State, look, the committee seems to value big wins. It's why Tennessee's number one. They've got two top 10, according to the committee rankings, wins. So if you're Ohio State, you've got Michigan on your schedule and maybe an Illinois team who, if they keep winning, will be a top 15 team or so in the Big Ten championship. But, I think it matters. I don't know if it matters a ton. And for those of you tuning in live, if you have any questions for Bill about the national college football scene, his opinions on Ohio State, feel free to throw them in the comment section. We'll try and get those while we got them. But Bill, if there is a team that maybe no one's talking about a lot that you think could sneak into the college football playoff based on what those first rankings were, who might that be?
In North Carolina, I mentioned them. A Pac-12 team. Like, can that be an answer? A Pac-12 team like
Sure.
that slips. The one of the Pac-12 teams that interests me most is this is an obvious answer, but USC with
Mhm.
Caleb Williams. Can they bounce back, run the table? They don't leave the state of California for the next month. They've got 3 home games and Notre Dame in there. They've got a trip to UCLA. I think if they played Oregon in the Pac-12 championship and won, that they would have a very good playoff case. Not to mention the guy that right now sits third in all the Heisman polls in Caleb Williams. So they're a very interesting team to me. Like I said, I mentioned the Tar Heels. Can't really think of anybody else. I guess Illinois would be the most off the wall answer I can give you, but I mean, it's in front of them, right? If they
Yeah.
were to go to Michigan and win and somehow beat Ohio State, what I would ask you, I throw this back on you. What do you think the pushback would be on Illinois Big Ten champion if they ran the table, knowing that they lost to Indiana in that weird game? And I remember watching that game in September. They weren't the same team then that they
Right.
are right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's why you play the games throughout the season, right? Like some teams aren't going. You're going to evolve as a team throughout the season. Even the top teams. You look at Georgia, Ohio State. You know, no one was talking about Tennessee at the beginning of the season, right? And Ohio State's changed. That defense keeps getting better, even though it was pretty good to start the year. And CJ Stroud, the running game was good, and now it's not so good. Yeah, I think that's kind of why you go through the course of the season instead of just doing a top four right at the beginning of the year and being done with it. But yeah, Illinois is an interesting one because, as you mentioned, you know, you get if they can win the Big Ten championship as a one-loss team, and then and then what happens with Ohio State? Say they beat Ohio State in the narrow Big Ten championship game, and I don't think they would be
Right.
anywhere near favorites in that game. If Ohio State's a one-loss, narrow loss to Illinois, who is a top 15 team, could you argue putting Ohio State in along with Illinois?
I think you could. And I still think, the Ohio State Michigan debate that's going to get going here in a few weeks.
Yeah.
I was asked on 97.1 this week, is that an elimination game? Anthony Rothman asked me that. And I really had to think about it. Like, I know you go on there a lot too, and then you get stuck because I'm like, I think so.
Yeah.
But, from Ohio State's standpoint, they would use against them that it was a home game. I think the Illinois loss they would use a little bit more, even though, like I said, I think the Illini are a good team. When they play Michigan in a few weeks, that's got 21-17 Big Ten bully ball written all over it. A
Yeah.
2.5
Well,
nice 2.5 hour game.
yeah, that's one we're going to get into here in a couple weeks, and we'll talk about it plenty. You mentioned 97.1 The Fan. Our friend Timmy Hall here from the Buckeyes Show stopped by the happy hour. Timmy, who is a regular guest. I assume you two know each other. Tim, Bill, Bill, Tim. Yeah.
Well, I know Bill. I think we still got to catch a round of golf. We've spoken on the air several times. We've never actually met in person, so it's good to see your face, buddy. How we doing?
Great. Look at that. Man, Patrick, you set up that free advertising for them right on. No, I was just saying I enjoy all the hits on 97.1, and we were talking about how Rothman asked me this week if Ohio State Michigan would be an elimination game from the playoff standpoint, and I was kind of stuck on the air because I'm thinking, in one sense, yes, but in the other sense, I do think it's funny to me that the Ohio State Michigan does not get the same credit. Maybe some of it's for the schedule, but to me, if Georgia loses tomorrow, they may have a tough road back in trying to become a playoff team. That's just my opinion. Tennessee's got a little bit more wiggle room because they beat Alabama. Georgia won't have that. Their schedule's pretty weak right now outside of Oregon.
It's really interesting, isn't it, guys? Because I'm sitting here thinking about the last year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they were relevant a time or two in between, but the chaotic year in college football where Illinois takes down Ohio State and somehow Ohio State winds up not just back in the picture, but the number one ranked team. I mean, truly wild, right? That could happen with a late season loss to Illinois, nonetheless. So you wouldn't bet your life on anything, right? Like that's what it's about in this business. You make these predictions. Pat, you asked the question, like, or Anthony asked the question, could it be an elimination game? If you put me into a corner today, I would tend to say yes, just because we continually see the SEC teams shuffled up ahead of most of the teams in the other conferences when things appear equal in terms of just straight up win-loss record. And then we can mince words on which loss was a better loss, which win was a better win, which conference is deeper. We got old Boo Radley sitting up there saying that they don't look, whoa, we don't look at conferences at all. I'm like, yeah, but you look at teams and those teams are in conferences. So when you're boiling down those individual teams, they are all then in a select conference when you look at it. And the SEC seems to get the benefit of the doubt over the last several years. And I'm not even saying that that's incorrect. When you've won 13 national championships, you're probably going to catch the benefit of the doubt, and they're going to groove some of those when or trying to decide between LSU or UCLA, but when the difference is a loss, chances are that SEC team is going to get the extra credit there. So I bet it is an elimination game, even if it is like this 50-year matchup where it's 2 11-0s and they're two, if it's 1 versus 3 or 2 versus 3 or whatever it's going to be. I tend to think it is.
Well, and I think it depends what happens elsewhere, right? Like if there's some sorts of chaos, then maybe it's not as much. But if things kind of go the way we expect, then I imagine that one Big Ten team gets in as opposed to both of them. Bill, I know you got stuff going on that you got to get to. So if you need to hop off, feel free.
No, yeah, I was just going to say before I hop off, I got a call with Bobby Carpenter, of course. I think I just talked to and anytime this will be my second Lancaster reference. Anytime one of my fellow Lancaster guys calls.
What was the first Lancaster reference on this pod?
I referenced William Sherman and Atlanta, and that always gets a lot of, I'll just leave it at that. Being a Lancaster kid and that. But I looked it up. So real quick, Ohio State has never played a bowl game in Atlanta. The closest you would have to get would be a couple Citrus Bowl appearances. And I was scrolling down their list of bowl games, and I chuckled at the Alamo Bowl game against Les Miles-led Oklahoma State and Vernon Morency. So, they, and then tonight, of course, I'm going to put this out there since you guys know me, a big game between Pickerington Central and Pickerington North tonight in the Division I high school playoff. So
I'll be broadcasting that game tonight.
Yeah, it should be fun, man. You're gonna see a good one. You're gonna see a lot of good local talent here from Pickerington. So you guys enjoy the game, and Patrick, enjoy rainy Chicago, where the Bears will be coming, or the Packers will be there soon. Maybe we'll win that. So thanks so much for having me on. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. Next time we'll plan a little better so we can get you on longer.
No problem. Thank you.
See you, Bill.
Thanks, man. Timmy, I'm sad to see that you have not, or hear that you have not met Bill in person, because he's a lot of fun. I led off as he got on here saying I haven't seen enough of him this year because being a national guy, he's doing a lot of stuff, and sometimes it's easier for him to just cover things from home. He used to be, when I first really got going on this, he used to be at the press box all the time, so got to see a lot of Bill. But you two need to swing some sticks sometimes. I hear you both enjoy that.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I don't understand anybody that doesn't love golf. Like, that's the way I am today. I mean, how could you not just gravitate towards a game like that gets you outside, gets the hand-eye coordination going? It's a game that you can play into your elder years. You're not running all over the place. We're not playing softball or even pick up basketball, which I like to do that as well. But you could just enjoy a six-pack, ride in a cart. I mean, you think I'm walking? No, I'm not walking. I'm riding in a cart, so it's comfortable. I'm relaxed. The only walking I'm doing is from that driver's seat or the passenger seat going to my ball. That's all I'm doing.
Oh, golf. I've had many arguments with my friends who all play golf about why I don't play golf, and they all want me to pick it up. And I'm like,
it's
at this point in my life,
it is a sport.
It's not that. I just have no interest. I've done it once. I did it for a bachelor party. It was fine. I don't,
Anytime I've played golf with non-golfers, there is a 50% chance that I actually get struck by the golf ball by that person. No matter how much in the safe zone I am. I mean, some wild stuff has happened to me, like ball bouncing off of one of the garbage cylinders back into like my legs, or someone just shanking one 90 degrees right off the hosel. Stuff that you don't think could happen. Someone hit a wooden sign and the ball rocketed back towards me. It's insane. Yeah. Like 3 or 4 times I've had a golf ball screaming down at me.
I actually did okay. I was told, at least, that it was okay. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. It was better than I expected.
You're a natural athlete, Pat. And natural athletes can adjust and adapt and look decent playing whatever game, stick sport, ball sport you throw there. I got to say, I love that artwork back there. I mean, they're really filling up that wall there. Yeah. That's beautiful. That's what are we in, a Ramada or something?
We are in a Marriott. Actually, they tried to give Steve and I one bed, and apparently there is a youth hockey tournament here in Chicago. And so the hotels grouping that we're in is filled with hockey families. And so the lady was like, we don't have any rooms. We don't have any rooms. And I was like, well, I booked 2 beds. Like, we got to do something here. And she was very nice and was able to get us 2 beds. So Steve and I don't have to cuddle with each other.
Oh man, could have been sleeping in an electrical room or something.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being in Chicago, I don't expect this to be much of a game tomorrow. I imagine you don't expect this to be much of a game tomorrow, but we should give it a few minutes, I think. Is there anything about this game that has you interested in the game more than just Ohio State side of it? Like, could you see Northwestern for any reason hanging around, or do you see the Buckeyes maybe looking down the road? Is there anything about this game that has you kind of questioning that it won't be 51-10 or something along those lines?
Well, I think a little bit the last part of what you just said there, Pat, it's just complacency, right? That's really, you're getting into the mental aspect of it right now, because I mean, there isn't a college football fan, not a Northwestern fan, not a Northwestern donor, nobody. As Northwestern purple as you are, there isn't anybody that would say that they've got a shot to beat this Ohio State team,
Yeah.
There might be a couple delusional ones that think they're going to, hang within 17 or, maybe 14 and take it into the third quarter by some long shot. I know in my heart that that's not going to happen. So you do just want to see Ohio State go and play clean football. Really, that's what you want to see. It's not going to be a raucous or a rabid road environment. So at the very least, you want the formational penalties to be cleaned up. You don't want any illegal formations or illegal shifts. The false starts need to be out of there. The delay of games need to be out of there. Those little things, Pat. I got to tell you, I guess I feel like more than most, I was concerned. I was concerned about that. I know it's a road game at Penn State, but that's part of your preparation. Like that's part of being a championship team, is not letting that happen again and again and again. You're ready for it. You're prepared for it, because you already know going in that they are going to be the loudest crowd that you're going to see all season. I know they were able to win the game, right? But let's not pretend like that wasn't in complete danger zone in the fourth quarter. I mean, trailing, and I'm not, in my heart, I'm not even certain how good, or if Penn State's a great team. They haven't beaten a ranked opponent. The only other great team they played absolutely demolished them and ran for almost 450 yards on them. So there's some concerns there. So, and I know we're not going to get solutions to those concerns that I've got until November 26th. That's just a simple fact. So you have a couple of cupcakes. After this one, you'll have Tom Allen's LEO crew, who's really fallen off the table at Indiana. And then we talked a lot about maybe a minor trappy kind of game against Maryland. But it's all about the Buckeyes right now, Pat. It's all about cleaning things up, playing your best game. No turnovers. I'd like to see CJ go the rest of the way now without an interception. I think that's another goal that I've got for him.
Yeah, I mean, he's got 4 already, I believe, this year. And I think he had 4 all of last year. So maybe he had a couple more last year. I'd have to look. But I think to your point that, you mentioned complacency. I think the fact that it's coming off of that game against Penn State kind of guards against that a little bit. You mentioned that Maryland game. That's the one where I think you could have a little bit of that, especially if they roll these next 2 weekends. But yeah, I think it's going to be another, of most of the games we've seen this season. If Ohio State gets out early, rolls, as long as you don't turn the ball over, and whether it's CJ or anyone else, I think you're going to be pretty comfortable in this one. I expect the stats to jump back up to what they were. I imagine this run game's going to really get going again, because I just don't see the way Northwestern can stop it.
Let me ask you something, Pat, because
Sure. Yeah.
we were discussing Northwestern football a little bit on the air this week because, hey, why not? We've had a little bit of history with them. We've met them in the Big Ten championship game. They are definitely a unique program. One would have to give them that, with how they have spiked. They've had some pretty good success for who they are. I got to tell you, if my son were a big-time football player, I'm not like sitting here to say I would steer him away from Ohio State, but you talk about a Harvard type of institution academically, right?
Yep.
that gets to play in the Big Ten and has their athletics in one of the best conferences in all of America. So they've got incredible opportunity to, like, and I know they're not the only one. Like, we can debate, we can talk about Notre Dame, even though they're independent, they're not in a big conference, but to be also in proximity to Chicago, within an L train ride of being in one of the biggest cities in America,
Yeah.
and with all the connections you could make if you, whatever kind of life you want to go into, whether that's sports, broadcasting, the business world, finance, like, it's all right there in Chicago. So it's a really unique program, and I've always looked at them and wondered, could they ever make more of a consistent switch into being, one of those 8 to 10 win programs. They've shown they can do it, but the consistent switch is something that not many programs can pull off. I'd say, TCU with Gary Patterson achieved that, coming from pretty much a regular old program to then dominating a Mountain West and then even elevating to a new conference. And then they kept that going for a while. Baylor, after being a doormat, made a switch. And of course there was some reasons behind that one when you see what Art Briles was all about. But I do. I wonder, what's your take on them, Pat? You think they could ever, make the move? Because Pat Fitzgerald is obviously having a rough go of it this year and last season.
Yeah, I think it's just harder in a sport like football, where, like in basketball, you can get a guy or two. You work hard, you recruit the guy or two. That can build for a year, maybe 2 years. You go on to next recruiting class, and I feel like you can get momentum that way quicker. With football, because of how big the teams are and the physicality of the sport, I think it's tough. I also think academically it's hard. I mean, you look even at a Notre Dame, who, you put Notre Dame in the Big Ten year after year. Is that, I mean, not that they've been consistently nationally relevant in terms of college football playoff and stuff, but that's a program with a lot of history that's not doing a ton with it because of the academics. A lot, to get into Notre Dame, even if you're going on a football scholarship, it's tough. So, yeah, I mean, I think you've seen Northwestern you mentioned those spikes, the every other year making the Big Ten championship. I think that's probably the ceiling for this program. I think it would take a lot to really jump up and become a consistent Big Ten team at a school that has those academic standards. And probably, I mean, they've obviously put more resources into football recently. If you haven't seen, I know you tweeted out the other day that picture from their practice facility. It's fantastic.
How incredible is that?
Yeah, I tried the last time we were out here. I reached out to them about going out to see the facility while we were here, and I did not hear back until after I was back in Columbus. And they also said no. But I've seen pictures. I've talked to people that have been there, and it looks fantastic. I don't know, but I don't know if that alone. They're supposed to be creating a new stadium that also looks awesome. It's going to be a smaller stadium.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that enough is to get the recruiting going, because we know how important that can be. Maybe if they could land a quarterback or two in a row, that starts to jumpstart the offense a little bit. Pat Fitzgerald and his staff are defensive guys that can do some things there. I don't know. I just don't see much beyond what they've been able to accomplish the last 5 or 6 years.
And Pat's interesting from one Pat to another. You're interesting too, but Pat Fitzgerald, I don't know if you heard us talking about it on some of the shows in the last week or two, but I hit on this a couple times. Pat went with one of the old tired excuses after, he was being questioned by his local media. I was watching him one of the midweek press conferences. This was before Ohio State week or two back, and he went with the old I feel sorry for all you guys in the Twitter sphere. And someone had asked him about that, so to his credit, and the reporter had said that it was a hobby of his to follow things being said on social media, like almost all of us do, part of our jobs who are in the media, and just sharing content with people that listen to our shows or people that are interested in the sport. It's a good content stream for getting information. I mean, I think anybody would have to recognize that, even a Pat Fitzgerald. But he followed that up by saying, I feel sorry for all you guys that have to pay attention to that stuff, by saying, I got a great idea. How about we create a business where, you and me, he was talking to the reporter, you and me, we could go to people's jobs and then we can criticize them. And that could be a whole lot of fun. And it's like, come on, Pat, you really you're smarter than that. That's not how that works. I agree to do that. Yes, I agree. You can come here, yell at me, criticize me. The only drawback is we switch salaries. That's the only thing.
Oh,
You
you're
give
taking
me
his
your salary. I'll take all that heat and criticism you speak of, and then you can have my radio station salary, and you only get like a few emails or Twitter messages a month, and see how you like that. But for so long, it was Pat Fitzgerald could not be touched, and I mean, losing. If you continue to lose, we know that that's never going to be the case. I think he's always been given that ability to rebound from a bad season. But if one bad season turns to two and then turns to three, then I would expect Northwestern might have to do something. And I really don't have any idea at this stage who a big time candidate, who the next guy would be. I don't know if that guy's on staff right now. They don't feel to me, Pat, like they have a Jim Leonard who's there that kind of everyone knows they really like the guy. So yeah, they're just one of those programs where they're just in the Big Ten. Even though they can be good every few years, you're never too concerned about them.
Yeah, I started off, and I'm going to get back to what you said in a second. I started off the show, I know you weren't on yet, but saying how because we just got to Chicago, I was drinking water for the first time on the podcast. Hellwagon came through. He's got some beer, so happy hour can continue here. I didn't want to let down the people that come here to watch me drink beer in the middle of the day. I know that you're one of them. Going back to your point, I think if there's one guy on the staff, maybe defensive coordinator Jim O'Neill. Ryan Day talked about him this week and how they work together in the NFL. He's got experience there. But honestly, I think if you were to change from Pat Fitzgerald, I think you got to go out and find somebody who brings some excitement. And if you can get a name, maybe one of those up and coming coaches in the MAC, do what Minnesota did. Go get a PJ Fleck. And not that that's worked out great, but somebody like that would.
What about a Jason Candle? You mentioned the MAC guy that's in Northwest Ohio at Toledo, and he's doing a pretty darn nice job there from what I can see. I think they're always above 500. And we know you got to take the records with a grain of salt because most of those MAC programs, they beat themselves up in the non-conference. I mean, like you saw, they played Ohio State on the road. They ain't winning that game. And a lot of them you'll see play multiple Big Ten or SEC schools in a non-conference slate. And then their really good teams are usually 0-3 or 1-3 going into conference play. And you look at the scoreboard and you're like, oh man, these teams really suck. And then they wind up being pretty good by the time the year is over. They just don't have that pretty 10-2 record unless you throw a PJ Fleck Western Michigan season out there, and he was able to do it.
Yeah, I think it's somebody like that. Or not that he would leave, especially now, but is there a Luke Fickell out there? Obviously Cincinnati, I think he's pretty entrenched there right now unless Ohio State comes calling. But they're also going to the Big 12, so he doesn't have a reason to jump ship. But is there somebody like that in a group of 5 conference that's kind of made a name for themselves and is looking for that next step? We've talked a lot more Northwestern than I anticipated, so that's actually probably a good thing. You mentioned a couple of the things that you were not happy with from the Penn State game, and I want to go back on some of that because that was such a big game. What was the biggest issue in your mind that kept that game closer than it could have been? What stood out as number one that you need fixed before Ohio State plays Michigan in a few weeks?
Other than all the miscues and
no, that can be
penalties
what
on
was
yourself.
the top thing?
I do think now that you bring that up again, the other thing that would be on my mind is that interior offensive line play. And I know they're stacking the box against you, but if they do stack the box against you, just go to that passing game earlier, get away from running those bubble screens and get the ball up the field to Marvin and Emeka and Cade Stover as well. Like they were eventually able to find just an abundance of success, in that second half and that fourth quarter as well. But the the fact that you couldn't get that run game going until the bitter end, and you saw what the rival was able to do against that same defense running the football. Mayan is important for me. I mean, I think all of us have grown really fond of that dude and the way he runs and the heart and the hustle and the break tackle ability that he has. So the fact that he averted a more serious injury, I think that's major for this team. And I gotta see that offensive line hit another level. Maybe that's what I just want to see tomorrow, Pat, is that them just blow Northwestern right off the football and just create yards of space for the running backs right off the snap of the football. Don't care what kind of defensive front. Like, tomorrow should be one of those kinds of games where you don't care what they're bringing up into the box. You run it on them anyway because your dudes are bigger and more physical. You need to get back to having a nasty edge. I hope that this team has that. I mean, that I'd be shocked if they didn't, considering how that emotion is going to come rushing back to them when we get to the week of the game, considering they lost it. But it's something I'd like to see.
Yeah, the run game is something that I've been looking at it a lot. I've been talking to people this week that, look, I didn't grow up playing football. I've studied it quite a bit over the last several years as I've been covering this. And I think there's a lot of different things that we can talk about. And Tim, once you jump off here, I'm going to dive into it a lot more. But here's one thing I think that I want to point out. Yes, you need to be a more balanced team when you play good teams. But in the last two games where teams have stacked the box and not been able to run the ball, still scored 54 and 44 points. Like, this is an offense. Now, you can't get as one-dimensional as they did at times last year. But look at, like, the Buffalo Bills, for instance. They don't run the ball much because they have talented in the pass game. You need to be able to run the ball in certain instances, and you need to be able to do it effectively in the red zone, in short yardage situations. And I know Ryan Day talks about being a balanced offense, and he talked about it on the radio show this week, 250 and 250. Ohio State's not 250, 250. They don't do it. In big games, Ryan Day throws the ball. That's their best avenue to win. And, it's a different than what Ohio State used to be. And you saw it last week. When they got going, it was because C.J. Stroud and Marvin Harrison Jr. connected, and then Cade Stover got involved in that was when the offense started to roll. If they can just get the running game strong enough to do what it was doing earlier in the season against inferior teams and then hit in those important situations, I think that's when it's most important. I don't think you need to be a top 25 rushing attack with this offense because it's built to pass with the receivers, with the quarterback, with an offensive line that frankly is better at pass blocking than they are at run blocking. But I do think, in these games, you want to get that confidence back and you want to be able to run against Michigan for sure when you need to be able to run against Michigan. I guess that's my thought on what this offense has to do rushing the ball.
Yeah, I'm with you, Pat. I don't know. When you're much, much better, what would you rather be much, much better at? Would you rather lean towards dominant run or dominant pass? And we could probably do a deep analytical dive on that and find out which types of teams. Say you have a really, really good defense. Typically, teams that have a really dominant defense would then lean heavier on the run because they would want to play that ball control. And that's like the Baltimore Ravens, right? With a running quarterback. They throw when they really need to throw. They like to hit Mark Andrews in the tight end game, and
not enough this year because he's on my fantasy team.
No, you're right. You're right, but I find myself wondering what I'd rather have, like as far as the lean, like when the games get down to the bitter end, because being able to just dominate a team up front, which is why I don't want to. I guess the point I'm trying to make is I hear you. The balance is not going to be 250, 250. It's more about what the yard per carry is. It's more about when you run.
Yeah.
When you run, there's no reason with these players that you have and that line, there's no reason why you shouldn't kick ass doing it. That's
Yeah.
that's the thing. There should be no 2.2 days. There should be no, 3.1 days, especially if you are, having the box stacked against you and you're going to throw for, 450 yards. Then if you're able to find that success in the passing game over and over again, you should just keep doing it, right? Throw for 500 or throw for 550 or 6 if you got the elite quarterback, and they simply will not defend those seams or whatever they're not defending in the pass game. But when you do choose to go to run, then it's got to be effective. That's the thing that I'm thinking about, because you've got you've got Travion, you've got these dominant horses up front. And when you do see how like the run blocking just doesn't, like, it's like they're better at pass blocking than they are run blocking. Why? Ask Jim Lachey about that. That doesn't make sense. Pass blocking sucks. Run blocking is fun. Like that's what's fun for those dude movers up front.
For sure. And I do think you got to give credit to the opponent. They're looking at it and saying, okay, we can't stop the passing attack. They're going to get their passing. So let's try and stop the rush and then go from, work in to out defensively, I think is the way the last two teams, Penn State and Iowa, have approached it to slow things down. And, it's worked a little bit, I guess, but, 54 and 44 points is what they've given up. So I don't know. I think we could do a whole podcast on that. I know you've got stuff going on. I don't want to hold you up. You can get out of here. I'm going to ramble about running the football a little bit more here, but thank you for jumping on. I do appreciate it, as always. And you got to talk with Bill Bender, so it's a good day, I think, for you.
Yeah.
But you don't have beer.
I don't have beer. I've got iced coffee though, and I get to go outside and take a little field trip for work today. So we'll do our Buckeye show at 6:00 from the stadium, from Tiger Stadium in Pickerington. Classic battle, and I always love doing that game, Pat, because you probably have a Buckeye. You'll probably have an NFL dude who's on that field. That's just the way it's gone here lately. You got Ty Hamilton and Sonny Styles
now,
and you've got Jack Sawyer, obviously, and I might be missing one. I might be missing another Pick North guy from recently, but I know Duran Grant. We had him on the show last night. He's coaching for Pick North now.
Is he? Nice.
Yeah, he's coaching DBs, and
didn't one of the offensive? Didn't like Billy Price or one of those guys who played guard and then center? Pat Elflein. Wasn't one of them from Pickerington? I don't know which. Yeah, there really has been a lot. There really has. And the one thing that their coach Jay Sherritt reminded me of is Vrabel's defensive coordinator right now is dude with the thick beard. Yeah.
He's only like 36 years old. He's a Pick Central grad, like a 05 or a 06 Pick Central grad.
And Laurie Schmidt, formerly of 97.1 fan. Yeah.
Who of the most famous one of all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you enjoy that. Have fun. I will be in Chicago. I'm not even sure what we're doing tonight, but I'm sure we'll get into something.
All right, my man.
All right. Thanks for jumping on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, take it easy, Pat.
All right. Thanks again to Tim Hall. He's been our regular guest here on the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We're going to talk a little bit more. We probably won't go a full hour like we usually do because I'm behind schedule on some things because of the traveling today. But I do want to dive back into the run game and some of the comments Ryan Day made this week. Like I said, when I was talking with Tim, I looked into it. I went back and watched some of the runs from last week. I talked to people who know more about football than I do, to try and learn and try and be able to explain it a little bit better. And I think there's a number of reasons why the run game hasn't been as effective the last two games as it has been the rest of the season, because it really has been good. I mean, you look at the numbers, Ohio State's, I'm pulling them up here. Ohio State's been not, a top rushing team in the country, but right now they're ranked 34th overall with 191.5 yards per game. And that's after these last two games. So as I said with Tim, I think it's situational running that Ohio State needs to be at its best doing, and that's red zone, that's short yardage. But if you look at what didn't go well last week, a couple of things stood out to me. First, the right side of Ohio State's offensive line. And you can even throw Luke Whippler in there. I know there was at least a couple examples that I saw going around where he doesn't help on a block with Matthew Jones. Look, I don't know how injured Matthew Jones is. He's talked this year about that he's playing through some things, and I wonder if it wouldn't be a good idea to let him sit these next couple weeks when you probably won't need him against a team like Northwestern or a team like Indiana. Now, I'm not at practice. I don't know how good a guy like Enoch Viamahe or whoever it would be that would step in at right guard. But I think there's just been some issues on that side of the line and at right guard in particular. And I think Matthew Jones is very talented, but he just seems to not be quite at the level that I think he can play. And a few of those runs last week against Penn State were blown up in the backfield because of the blocking on that right side, including Luke Whippler. I also think that Penn State was able to read a lot of what Ohio State was doing. And Ryan Day was questioned about this, and credit to Bill Landis, formerly Athletic, now with Rivals, for pushing Ryan Day a little bit and asking him, is it ever wise, because there were the numbers out there that every time Ohio State was under center, they ran the ball. Was it wise to do anything 100% of the time? Because Ryan said to another reporter that, the question really isn't why they're doing it every time, but if it's working, why aren't they doing it more? He was talking specifically about the pistol formation, which is what Ohio State does to kind of eliminate, because when you play out a shotgun and you're running the ball, running back lines up to one side of the quarterback. It's usually, if he's on the quarterback's right, you're usually running the ball to the left. And there are some plays, counters and the toss plays and other things like that are exceptions to that. But for the most part, the defense can kind of tell where the running back's going if you're running the ball to shotgun. So the pistol changes things a little bit. You can't tell because the running back's lined up behind the quarterback. And I think, and I think Ryan Day's even said this, TreVeyon Henderson likes to be behind the quarterback and get a little bit more momentum instead of just taking the ball on the shotgun stuff. So, but the point of it was doing everything 100% of the time. And Ryan Day said, he thinks that if it's working, if it's being effective, then yes, they want to keep doing that. I mean, if it is effective, I think then there is justification there. I just think you look at the last 2 weeks, it hasn't been. What Ohio State hasn't done, there hasn't been a lot of play action out of that the last 2 weeks. Some of the other stuff that they've been able to do, they haven't gotten to. And even some of the plays that have worked, and there were some good running plays last week. I mean, let's not forget that TreVeyon Henderson had 2 rushing touchdowns. He had the big, I think it was a 41-yard rushing touchdown. So there are things that are working there, but maybe they're just not doing them as much. I know we talked with Marcus Hartman coming back from Penn State last week, and he said Ohio State should run power a lot more. And Marcus is a guy who I think knows quite a bit about football, Marcus, from the Dayton Daily News. And that's something that Michigan did to Penn State. And look, Penn State obviously had weeks between that Michigan game and Ohio State to get better and focus on what didn't go well. So I think give them credit for doing that. They also shut down Minnesota's run, which has been pretty good. But I think going back to what I was saying of the right side of the offensive line, I think is the issue. I also think TreVeyon Henderson needs to be better. And I think and if you go back and watch a lot of his runs this year, the vision is not where it needs to be in terms of where to hit on a certain play. And a lot of times, yes, there's the where the play is designed to go, but sometimes you just got to make a play as a running back. And I think TreVeyon Henderson in high school and even maybe some last year, and I'd have to go back and really watch some of his best runs last year, but I think that he needs to be more aware of where he's got to go, because there were too many times last week where maybe if he bounces it outside or if he sees a crease quicker, then you've got a big gain. And instead he doesn't seem to recognize that maybe until it's too late. We've seen a number of times this year him fall down, and it's hard to tell from watching on TV or from watching in the press box where his head is, what he's doing. But he, that to me, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes you just lose your footing. It happens. But to me, that maybe is not recognizing where it needs to be until you're a bit too late. You're trying to adjust late, you fall, as opposed to recognizing it either before you get the ball or, as the blocking's opening up. That there are times when he could be better at that. And I think in high school, he was just better than everyone, right? He's the number one running back in the country. So he was able to just do whatever he wanted. He didn't have to learn that stuff. I think that's part of the reason you've seen Mayan Williams be as effective as he's been, is because he's had to really work and focus. He's a 3-star kid that was originally committed to Iowa State, that he's had to develop his game. Travion Henderson has just always been so gifted. And, Sue asks here, is vision something that can be taught? Absolutely. I mean, it's film work. It's doing it on the practice field. I just think Travion Henderson is able to get away with a lot because he's just so naturally gifted. And that next step is understanding the game, the running game, the offensive line, things like that better. And I certainly think if you get that mix together, then you've got a really special player. And we've seen it at times because you know what Travion Henderson did last year. You've seen it on certain plays. And Anthony, and I was going to bring this up, J.K. Dobbins had the same problem his second year. I absolutely agree. He is a guy who I think if Travion Henderson was naturally a more talented running back than J.K. Dobbins, but if Travion Henderson follows J.K. Dobbins' trajectory in terms of spending this offseason and even now during the season working on that, I think he can take that big leap and be what will probably need to be a workhorse for Ohio State next year, because look, they'll have the receivers, but it's going to be a new quarterback. And while I think Kyle McCord, who I assume will be the starter, but either Kyle McCord or Devin Brown are very talented, I don't know. I don't know if they'll be CJ Stroud level good or Justin Fields level good. I just don't know if you can expect that year after year after year. And so you may have to rely on a Travion Henderson a bit more next year. We got Ken that says when Travion ran through the whole play design, he housed it. Yeah, I think if you look, and now credit to the offensive line too on that 41-yard or whatever it was touchdown play. That was as well blocked as Ohio State has done this year. I mean, they did it, and not only the offensive line, Cade Stover was involved in that. He took out 2 guys. That was the perfect play. And basically when you get that, and you get Travion Henderson, he knows where the hole is on that one. That's one we didn't have to do a ton of reading, and it was hole opens, run. And then you see what makes Travion Henderson special on that play. The safety has a good angle, and Travion Henderson just beats him to, essentially where the safety and the running back would have met if they continued on their trajectory. He just outruns him to that point and completely erases any tackling angle. And that's where he's special. His speed, his ability to just get by guys is different. And so that's why I say, if you can combine all of the things that are run, the vision, the understanding with his physical abilities, and I also think sometimes he looks for contact a bit too much, personally, but I don't know if that was a huge issue. But I do think this offensive line, as I said earlier, is geared to being a pass protecting offensive line. They obviously worked on that this offseason. They have gotten better at run blocking, no doubt about it. But there are issues. Again, Matthew Jones to me is primary in that. But I mean, there was a play last week where Paris Johnson gets knocked into the backfield, and we all know how good he is. It's not going to be perfect every time. You watch the NFL guys, the offensive line on run plays isn't always perfect, but you just need to be able to get enough of space for the running back, and then the running back has to be aware of where to go. And I think that combination just hasn't happened. And Ken also said, Travion here, when he gets options, he tends to dance in the hole. He does. I think Mayan, and that's another reason Mayan's been so successful this year, is he's a guy who just goes and he hits the hole and he's able to make plays. If you could combine Travion and Mayan into one player, put Travion's like speed and physical abilities with Mayan's kind of size and his ability that he's learned to read the game, I think that that would be a perfect running back for what Ohio State wants to go. But again, as I pointed out when we were talking with Tim Hall, Ohio State doesn't have to be the best rushing attack in the country. They have the best passing attack in the country, or top 5, top 2. You just need enough of the running game to complement that passing attack at times in those short yardage, those goal line, those type of situations, keep the defense off. And I do think the call, and that was the third thing I forgot to bring up, I do think the play calls can be better. I think you need to mix it up a bit more to keep teams guessing a little bit. And I think you could argue this was one of the poorer, and I'm talking about the Penn State game, one of the poor called first halves, at least, by Ohio State. And I know Ryan Day wants to defend the bubble screens by saying it's an extension of the run game and you're stretching the field. And I agree with that. And I think when they work, they can be really good. He brought up against Penn State a few years ago when they threw, I think it was the KJ Hill play, they threw a screen that won the game. It can be effective. There's no doubt about that we've seen bubble screens and whatnot. But I think the hesitancy to get away from the game plan and not when it's clearly not working and Penn State's keying on it and whatnot, I think that's where you've got your issues. So, look, I don't think that's going to be a problem on Saturday at Northwestern. Maybe the long grass will and poor weather conditions will slow Ohio State a little bit, but I think they'll be able to run the ball, pass the ball, whatever it is, just fine. So I think it will be a big one. We'll have our predictions on Bucknuts, so check that out. I'm going to wrap it up, but I want to thank Bill Bender from the Sporting News who jumped on at the beginning, giving us some national perspective on Ohio State. I thought that was important after the college football playoff rankings came out. The initial college football playoff rankings came out this week. And then, of course, Timmy Hall. It's always fun talking with Timmy. It's funny because I think he wants to disagree with me, but he's such a nice guy that he doesn't want to argue. And I'm going to get him to argue with me one of these days. You guys will see it. So thanks for everyone who tuned in live. Thank you for those who are listening on the podcast version of this. Give it a like, subscribe. All that really helps us out. And we'll be back next week. Hopefully this week was a little weird with the traveling and some stuff I had going on, but we'll probably do well. I don't want to plan a week ahead. We'll be back next week. I'll leave it at that. In the meantime, we'll see you. We'll see some. I imagine I'll see some people out at Northwestern tomorrow. I imagine that'll be a Buckeye takeover at Ryan Field. And for those watching at home, enjoy the game and cheers.